So having added my texture, I'm now going to start working with it a little bit. The first thing I want to do is I want to get rid of all this grit that is outside the lines of my UV, because as I've said multiple times, it's making it really hard to figure out where my lines are. Now this is very easy because I already went and selected this area before. I don't need to do it again. So I'll just go to Select, Load Selection, Channel, UV outside, the selection I made earlier. I hit OK, and that same selection is selected again, which means that I can now do whatever I want with the information that is outside the UVs. So there are a couple different ways to get rid of this grit outside here. I could just erase it from the layer completely, and that would be fine because I'm not going to need it, but oftentimes you'll find that something you erase you may end up needing later, especially if it's a stock image like this. So instead I'm just going to hide it using one of my favorite tools in Photoshop, the layer mask. Now what layer masks do is they let you hide certain parts of a layer without deleting that information in those parts. So I will be able to keep all this texture here, but only a part of it I will be able to see, and that will make my job a lot easier. So the way you create a layer mask is you go to Layer, Layer Mask, and then you can tell it how much of the layer you want to be able to see from the start. Normally I would just hit Reveal All, which means I would start off with a layer mask with everything visible, and I would be able to get rid of what I wanted. But instead I'm going to tell it Hide Selection. So now you can see that all this area that was in my selection outside the layer is now hidden. And if you look down here, linked to my layer is my layer mask. Now, layer masks are different from regular layers. You can paint on them, but you can only paint in values of black, white, or gray. You can't paint in color. And anywhere that is painted in white on a layer mask will show up. You'll be able to see that information. Anywhere that is painted in black, the information will be hidden. So all of this area outside my layer, outside my UVs here, on the layer mask is painted black. And to demonstrate that, you see that if I select white as my paint and click on the layer mask, and then use my brush tool, so if I paint in white here, you'll see that it's bringing back some of that hidden layer information. And if I paint in black, it hides it again. So layer masks are probably my favorite Photoshop tool. There's a lot of stuff you can do with them, but this is one of the more practical applications. Now another thing that I'm going to do now to get my texture ready to use is I'm going to make all this grit less visible. You'll remember that I said I only wanted a little bit of grit, a little bit of texture. This is a lot of texture. So I'm going to take this layer and I'm going to lower its opacity, which will make it less visible and more transparent. Now right now the opacity here is at 100%. I'm just going to take this little slider and I'm going to drag it down to, I'm thinking 35, so right about at 35%. And you can see that now what I have is much, much lighter, much, much fainter. So the texture is a lot harder to see, and that's the way I want it. I don't want it to be too obvious. And next we'll look at adding color and tweaking the texture to get it just the way that you want it for the plane.